Multiplier effect when we go live.
I'm, I am so sick of military jargon. My
Yeah.
own military, South Asia's military. It's like fucking speak some English. I'm sorry. And they speak in this
You
stilted
remember
way.
you remember Khurram Hussain when we go live?
Oh gosh, that's a
So sick of
flashback. Military jargon.
Yeah.
My own military, South Asia's military. It's like fucking speak some English.
Okay.
Oh, oh, so there is a little buffer because we just heard Dr.
Yeah.
Phil all over again. Wajahat.
Yeah, I've muted us. All right, we are live with the debate hosted by Malika Sandani, featuring Professor Christine Fair and Dr. Manoj Joshi. There we go.
All right, everybody. Good morning, everyone, and good evening to all those joining us from Pakistan and India. My name is Mehlaka Samdani. I am director at the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, an advocacy group that seeks to improve U.S. policy towards Pakistan and Palestine. I would like to welcome you all to our event today, South Asia's Fragile Peace, India, Pakistan, Political and Security Dynamics. The horrific terrorist attack in Pahalgam on April 22nd, which killed 26 tourists, led to a rapid escalation of tensions between India and Pakistan. India's Operation Sindoor, launched on May 6th, targeted sites in Pakistan-administered Kashmir and deep inside Pakistani territory, prompting Pakistan's Operation Bunyanum Marsoos in response. A US-mediated ceasefire on May 10th has paused hostilities, but tensions remain high and questions linger about the ceasefire's durability. Today, we aim to unpack the political, security, and strategic implications of this crisis. What were India and Pakistan's objectives? Who emerged as winners or losers in this crisis? What impact will this have for domestic politics? And what can the two countries, the US and international community, do to foster stability in a nuclear-armed region? To help us answer these questions and more, we have three very distinguished speakers with us today, who I will introduce in just a little bit. But first, a quick note about our format. So for the first 45 to 50 minutes, I'm going to ask our panelists a series of questions, after which we will open it up to audience Q&A. Please submit your questions in the Q&A function, and we will try and get to as many as possible. We invite all kinds of questions, just no bad language and no personal attacks against our speakers, please. So with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Dr. Manoj Joshi is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. He's been a journalist specializing on national and international politics and is a commentator and columnist on these issues. He was most recently a member of the Task Force on National Security, chaired by Mr. Naresh Chandra, to propose reforms in the security apparatus of the country. He has been the political editor of the Times of India, Hindustan Times, defense editor of India Today, national affairs editor of Mail Today, the Washington correspondent of the Financial Express, and a special correspondent of The Hindu in his 3 decades-long career as a journalist. Next, we have Wajahat S. He is an Emmy-nominated journalist and best-selling author specializing in South Asia's AFPAC theater of conflict, focus on the Indo-Pacific's politics, conflict, tech, and business. Currently, he is founder and CEO of the Ivy Future of Pakistan Conference, the largest and first of its kind platform to discover and debate the future of the Pakistani-American diaspora. A senior fellow at Washington's Atlantic Council, he has reported from 16 countries. He was previously bureau chief for NBC News in Kabul and Islamabad, embedded with over 100 NATO, Afghan, Indian, and Pakistani military and paramilitary units as he covered South Asia for multimedia platforms. Last but not least, we have Dr. Christine Fair, who is a professor in the Security Studies program within Georgetown University's Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. She previously served as a senior political scientist with the RAND Corporation, a political officer with the UN Assistance Mission to Afghanistan in Kabul, and a senior research associate at USIP's Center for Conflict Analysis and Prevention. Her most recent book is in Their Own Words, Understanding the Lashkar-e-Taiba, published by the Oxford University Press. Previous books include Fighting to the End, The Pakistan Army's Way of War, also OUP, and then Pakistan's Enduring Challenges by University of Pennsylvania Press. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So, Dr. Joshi, let me begin with you. From India's perspective, it launched Operation Sindoor in response to Pahalgam, targeting alleged militant infrastructure in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. So, the first part of my question is, what evidence did India have linking this specific attack to Pakistan or Pakistan-based groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed? Also, what were India's strategic and political objectives, and to what extent was India able to achieve these?
Thank you for having me here, and a good evening from my side from India. So the first thing I'd like to make is a general response with evidence of terrorist crimes. Extremely difficult to gather. Meaning, after all, do we really have evidence that Osama bin Laden was involved in the attack on the Twin Towers? So I can list a whole lot of terrorist attacks where evidence is an issue. In this case, our National Investigation Agency has been investigating and says that the attack was planned by the Lashkar-e-Taiba under the direction of the Pakistan Inter-Services Intelligence, Inter-Services Intelligence, and the conspiracy was formalized at the Lashkar-e-Taiba headquarters in Pakistan. Two of the attackers were Pakistani and two of them were Kashmiris. Now, what kind of evidence? Indian investigators say they have collected forensic evidence, including over 40 cartridges, conducted 3D mapping of the site, and extracted mobile tower data. Eyewitness accounts describe the attackers as foreign nationals, and some attackers reportedly using body-mounted cameras to record the incidents. The National Investigation Agency claims to have linked Pahalgam attack to a prior LET-based attack in Sonamarg in 2024, with the same operatives being involved. Indian officials claim to have technical intelligence, human sources, eyewitness testimony, establishing a direct Pakistani link, electronic signatures of attackers and their group. The resistance front was traced to locations in Pakistan. Of course, the resistance front first acknowledged the attack and then later retracted this thing. So this is broadly I'm actually surprised that they have this much evidence. Obviously, none of this evidence is available to me and is not in the public domain. There has been talk. Pakistan has said that we would like to have a neutral joint investigation. But our experience in the past, we had joint investigation in the attack on Pathankot Air Base in 2016, and nothing has really come out of that. And we've had tons of evidence with regard to the Mumbai attack of 2008, and yet we are unable to extradite the perpetrators of that attack, though Pakistan has convicted them of money laundering. But they have not been charged with terrorism. So evidence is a big issue in terrorist crimes.
So, Dr. Joshi, before you answer the second part of my question, you said you don't have access to that intelligence. And of course, it makes sense for, ordinary citizens to not have that kind of access. But was India able to share any of that with Pakistan or the US or the international community, with anybody, in order to lay a claim and basis for what it then eventually did, which was contravening international law in the most egregious ways by attacking deep inside Pakistani territory. Because, if Pakistan were to say, well, the Jafar Express attack, we know that India is implicated in that, or groups in India are implicated, and that is reason enough for us to then go deep inside Indian territory, that would be a massive escalation, and there will be a massive outrage that will be expressed by the international community and, of course, by India. So is that some way, for a country that claims to be a great power to respond and cross an international border, target sites there, and be okay with that? I mean, is that how great powers act?
Melika, what I'd like to point out is that all this comes at the head of 40 years of terrorist actions and activities coming from across the border in Pakistan. My entire professional career, I began in 1984, starting with Punjab, then going on to Jammu and Kashmir, then going on to other areas, has been a period where Pakistan has launched these attacks. Till this particular incident, the Indians have forborne, meaning there was 2016, there was a minor response. So was there in 2019, but there have been major attacks, Mumbai, and there we had all the fingerprints, of Pakistani involvement, not just us. The Western intelligence agencies were recording the conversations from Karachi to Mumbai, so all that was there. So what you are seeing is at the end of a process that there has been huge forbearance for 40 years, and the nuclear issue has kind of hung like a shadow over all this. And there has been things that, well, things will go nuclear and there can be a nuclear consequences of this development. But finally, India decided that enough is enough. What do we do when 26 people just get butchered in a meadow in Kashmir, civilians, unarmed people? In India, there was a huge amount of anger. And I think finally something snapped. And I think the leadership of the country decided that the hell with it, we are responding. And I think that was the kind of the attitude. And the second question you asked me is about these strategic goals of India.
Yes.
See, there is only one strategic goal. That is to somehow persuade Pakistan and the Pakistani establishment that you cannot sponsor terrorism. You cannot, or you should not be a sponsor of terrorism. You cannot use terrorism as a matter of state policy. So I think that is definitely a strategic goal because, Pakistan is where it is. We are where we are. So we're not going anywhere. We're going to be neighbors, forever. But if we have to be neighbors, if we have to live together as good neighbors, I think we cannot have a situation where terrorist attacks are launched on us. And as I said, I've seen this for the last 40 years. So it has nothing to do with just Kashmir. It has it's much beyond that.
And do you think that India was able to achieve that deterrence effect, like the impact that it wanted? Do you think with this operation, it was able to accomplish that?
I think to some extent, yes. Because to some extent, from whatever reports I'm getting, there is a certain degree of satisfaction that we have sent the message. Meaning, I don't know whether you saw a New York Times story today, which said that the Indian attacks were reasonably successful. They were not too intense, and that is deliberately so, because after all this happened in a matter of 2 or 3 days. So it wasn't as though there was some carpet bombing. It wasn't a Gaza-like kind of a situation. But wherever the Indians struck, there is evidence of that. And I think the message, I presume the message has gone home. Just how long that deterrence effect lasts, can't say. And there are many other issues that can be raised about the new red lines that India has drawn.
Sure. And we'll talk about the new norm, and I'm sure other speakers are going to respond to that as well. I'm going to now turn to Wajahat. Wajahat, Pakistan's Operation Bunyad no Marsooz really responded to India's Operation Sindoor, and it targeted Indian air bases and downed Rafale jets with Chinese-made J-10s and PL-15s. What did this operation reveal about Pakistan's defensive and offensive military capabilities, and how has it reshaped perceptions of Pakistan's deterrence against India? And please also feel free to respond to Dr. Joshi's earlier remarks.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this fascinating discussion, Malika. Big fan of Dr. Joshi and Christine, and it's a pleasure to be here with both of them. So I just Substacked this few hours ago, so I'm going to shamelessly plug my Substack on exactly this question. So 5 or 6 takeaways, real quickly. I'm going to speak in bullet points. I don't have the articulate mannerisms of Mr. Joshi, so I'm going to keep it quick. Number one, bigger is not better. That's one takeaway we have. The Indian military has what is called a quantitative asymmetry when it comes to Pakistan. It's just bigger. It's more men, more machines, more planes, more tanks, more everything. And we saw that that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a qualitative asymmetry. In fact, Pakistan with a smaller force showed that it has a qualitative symmetry, that it can punch above its weight, which it did in the first phase of the Indian attack in its own counterattack mechanisms. It's downed anywhere between 3 to 5 planes, depending on who you believe and who you talk to. But even the Indians are now committing to air losses in that first phase. They haven't given a number, but again, the numbers are somewhere between 3 and 5. That's one. So bigger is not better. Secondly, broke is not weak. Pakistan is broke, terribly broke. The world's 43rd largest economy versus the world's 4th largest economy, a 400 billion economy, not even 374 to be exact, as of last year, versus a $4 trillion rising, shining India, which is, again, a G20 member of the Quad. But Pakistan is broke, but weak is a different issue. I think the Indians went into this calculating that Pakistan is not ready for a long war. It probably isn't, but in a short, intense conflict, Pakistan can and did stand on its own, and it did, as we saw. But that's what all perhaps Pakistan can take, is a short, intense conflict before it escalates really quickly. Third, expensive is not advanced. The Rafale is a much vaunted deal. It's been in the pipeline for a good decade. Lots and lots of politics and chest thumping, especially 56-inch chests have been thumped about the Rafale. But, well, guess what? Not 1, not 2, perhaps 3. Again, depending on who you talk to. And expensive-wise, let's just look at it, do a quick cost-benefit analysis. And a Rafale Meteor package, well, that's Air Force jargon. I know Chris doesn't like military jargon. We were just discussing that. But a Rafale plus 2 Meteor package, that's a plane with 2 missiles, right? That costs the Indian roughly just about $288 million. That's around $280 million, $284 million for the Rafales, plus a couple of million per pop for those Meteor missiles, right? The Pakistani package, which, as you said, Malika, is the PL-15s and the J-10s. The Pakistani package is a $42 million package. $40 million for the J-10, which, by the way, reports indicate that the Pakistanis haven't even paid for, and around $900,000 a pop for those PL-15s, which have, frankly, downed several Indian aircraft. So premised on that, the whole nature of the buildup to the war, and by the way, the buildup has been happening not over the last 2 weeks. The buildup has been happening over years. This was a tipping point. Sure, the Pahalgam incident was a tipping point, but the Indian buildup has been happening over years. In fact, it's fair to say that over a decade and a half, India has been the larger importer of arms in the world. Not in South Asia, not in Asia, on the planet. And this has been happening for a decade and a half. Pakistan's defense budget wanes in comparison to India's. We if you look at open source intelligence, the Indians are touching somewhere 70, 80, maybe $90 billion versus the Pakistanis who haven't even breached the $10 billion mark in years. The first increase just happened days before the war at about 16%. Is that the first increase? The Pakistanis are broke. The Pakistanis are smaller. And the question is, were the Pakistanis at fault or not? And I think that's where I'm going to let you take this conversation. But even if they were, what's funny, I'm in New York right now. What's funny, Malika, to your question to Dr. Joshi is that just yesterday, a team of Indian diplomats has finally arrived at the United Nations here to discuss exactly the intelligence that Dr. Joshi was appraising us about. That's funny. So the war happens first, and we approach the UN later. I thought it was the other way around the last time I checked the global order, that if you have intelligence against any certain country, actor, non-state actor, you go to the Security Council, you thump the table, you say, can I have your attention, please? This country has attacked me, here's the intelligence. The Indians are doing that after the conflict, not before the conflict. I find that strange. And premised on that, I find a lot of other things strange, especially the way the Indian media has been behaving, but that's perhaps in a second round of questions, we can address that.
And I think in response to 9/11, I think that is the sequence of events that happened, right? So the US did rally international support, took that information to the UN before launching Operation Enduring Freedom. So what do you think this time, though, Wajahat, in terms of the narrative around Pakistan being a co-sponsor of terrorism that the Indian government had been propounding? Do you think there was that resonating with the international community, with the international media, or was it slightly different this time?
I think Pakistan's done a remarkable job of shooting itself in the foot over years of its policies. Pakistan probably has some of the worst PR in the world versus India's, which is remarkably slick in its PR. While both countries have a lot of communal issues internally, issues against the minorities, the Indians literally get away with murder, while the Pakistanis don't. Both countries have problems, but of course, in just the terror sphere, we're not talking about communalism, we're not talking about minorities, we're not talking about how they treat their women, we're not going there. We're just talking about terrorism. Pakistan has a long and jaded history of its experiments with the militant outfits going wrong. It starts right in the 40s with the first Kashmir war, where the apologist frame of mind in Pakistan says, oh, it was the Qaid-e-Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the first perpetrator of proxy war, because we're smaller, because we've been done wrong in the partition, because India is larger, bigger, badder in every way. Proxy war works. That's the Pakistani apologist point of view. Compound that with its experiments with Islamism, and you have what you have today. People throw phrases like Osama bin Laden, Taliban, safe havens, Quetta Shura around, and the Indians are particularly good at throwing around the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar-e-Tayyiba and the University of Terror phrases, and they're taken credibly because Pakistan's done a terrible job and has a terrible record. But it must also be said that the Indians, especially under this right-wing Hindu nationalist government, the Indians have also upped the ante of late. The Indians have been hitting targets in Vancouver. The Indians are in court right now, being tried right here in New York for trying to kill a Sikh dissident here. The Indians have gotten warnings from the British and Australian governments for running extrajudicial assassination campaigns on their soils. The Indians have, with a tongue-in-cheek, gone ahead with the media backing the Baloch insurgency in Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban insurgency in the northwest, and over the last 2 years, a spate of killings of jihadi or militant or freedom fighter or mujahideen, call them whatever you want to call them. But the Indians have been on a killing spree in Pakistan with over 24 Kashmiri or even Sikh militants or alleged militants killed by their intelligence agencies, and with a wink and a nod and a ghoske marenge they've walked away with it because guess what? They can, because they are rising. They have this fantastic, I must say, enviously, they have this fantastic PR machine which does well. But should it provide camouflage for India's dirty underbelly, which is now partially exposed? Minutes ago, the BJP just launched an 8-minute video asking its supporters to support fake media. And they said, even if your Sena, your military is losing, but your media is saying it's winning, support fake media. That's literally the BJP's messaging on day 2 after the conflict. That's shameful for the world's largest democracy. Shameful.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Joshi will have a response to that when we come to him. But I think the transnational repression that has been taking place in countries like Canada and the US by the Indian government, I think that has given people, I think, pause in the international community around claims of cross-border terrorism. So let me now turn to Dr. Fair. India claimed that the Pahalgam attack was orchestrated by the support of Pakistan-based groups, and it targeted Lashkar-e-Taiba, right, and Jaish-e-Mohammed in response. Pakistan insists that these groups are now defanged and they lack state support. Based on your research, to what extent, if any, does the Pakistani military or ISI leverage these groups for anti-India activities in Jammu and Kashmir? And how do you see this whole Pahalgam attack and the evidence that was provided in its wake unfold?
All right, so first I have to give you a heads up. I have a hard stop in 15 minutes. So I'm also going to try to be brief. So the first issue, the Pakistan government claims that it no longer supports these groups, that it's been defanged, is just outright nonsense. We actually saw evidence of that being nonsense with some of the footage from Jaish-e-Mohammed activists who were killed in the attack and who was attending it, actually Pakistan Army officials. I do primary source material. So I look at Lashkar. I don't focus on Jaish-e-Mohammed. I focus on Lashkar-e-Taiba. I have an extensive study of their fighter biographies. I recently wrote a piece with my colleague Ilyas Khan, which was based upon a translation of a book by LET, in which it was engaging in ideological work for the Pakistan Army. So I have a massive textual base that supports my claim that LET is an arm of the Pakistani state. And it's important to understand why. Not only does it doesn't conduct attacks within Pakistan itself. It only conducts attacks at the behest of the Pakistani state in India and also on occasion in Afghanistan. And so it stands in contrast to this mass soup of Deobandi organizations that include the the Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, the Pakistani Taliban, I'm blanking out the whole soup of Deobandi organizations that have been operating in Pakistan for quite some time. So LET opposes those Deobandi organizations that engage in takfir. Most of the individuals that are participating in Islamic State attacks in Pakistan are actually Deobandi by background. So LET has a really important function that it plays domestically as a bulwark and as an ideological fighter against the Deobandi notion of takfir that has seized Pakistan. Jaish-e-Mohammed is useful to the Pakistani state for two reasons, one of which is similar to LET. It generally only attacks targets in India and occasionally in Afghanistan. But it's not as disciplined as LET. And the reason is Jaish-e-Mohammed shares overlapping membership with all of these other Deobandi groups that I told you. So there was a large split with Jaish-e-Mohammed at the end of 2001. In fact, Masood Azhar lost most of his cadres. And the Pakistan Army and the ISI put a lot of resources into rebuilding the organization. And the reason why it is important domestically for the Pakistani state is that it's sort of a Bharvapasi program for wayward Deobandi militants. The Pakistani state tries to say to the Pakistani Taliban, why don't you rejoin Jaish-e-Mohammed and kill Indians as opposed to killing Pakistanis? So that's my read. So what was the next part of your question?
So, no, my question was, so Jaish-e-Mohammed actually had claimed responsibility for the 2019 Pulwama attack, right?
Well, not only that, there was a suicide bombing video. You had a smoking gun.
No, but my
To-
question is, I mean, Jaish-e-Mohammed militants, they had claimed responsibility, but for Lashkar-e-Taiba, it has not claimed responsibility for this, for the Pahalgam attack and the resistance
Well,
front.
let's be very clear. So after Pulwama, the group would be foolish to take credit, right? The whole point of using these groups is plausible deniability. So it was quite surprising that Jaish-e-Mohammed took credit for an attack that was so sanguinary. So Dr. Joshi has sort of laid out what the intelligence is. I don't have access to that. What I do have access to is reporting that the American government did see this intelligence and that it was satisfied that Lashkar-e-Taiba conducted the attack. Now, I don't repose a lot of confidence in the Trump government. I think it's a government of buffoons, and I certainly don't think much of Tulsi Gabbard as DNI. So and so they're not reliable narrators. But what I can say is what I said was that in the international media, the US media, it's been reported the US was satisfied with Indian intelligence. Now that may not satisfy you, but quite frankly, it satisfies me for the reasons that Dr. Joshi laid out. But I want to go back to something that you raised. I've actually been raising this in international media, Indian media, excuse me, and that is the issue of the Jaffa Express. So I've been one of the few analysts going back to 2008 that has raised Indian subconventional operations in Balochistan and elsewhere in Pakistan. And I was pilloried for doing so until Avinash Paliwal wrote a book about it. So once it gets mansplained, it gets to be more easily accepted. So I don't think there's a question of India engaging in subconventional operations. In fact, I've been public saying that India should do more of this and less of what we just saw. It would be far more efficacious for serving India's goals if it could conduct a decapitation strike on the leadership of Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. I know that there are reports in Pakistan that India has tried. The fact that they're still alive tells me that India has tried potentially, but it's clearly failed. That would be far more devastating to the capabilities of the group to function than these high risk targetings that the Indian government has pursued instead. I also believe that the timing of Pahalgam probably has to do with the Jaffa Express. If we were to ask why would Pakistan do Pahalgam when it did, and I'm assuming that it did for all the reasons that Dr. Joshi laid out, he and I think very similarly on these issues. There was the Jaffa Express, there was the lagging popularity of the Pak Army generally, and Munir in particular. And if we were to measure success by Pakistani measures, you can make a strong case that Pakistan came out of this conflict with its pound of flesh. Yes, the New York Times and the Washington Post both reported that Indian targets generally that Indian missiles generally hit their targets, but they also said that the damage was minimal and not catastrophic, as the Arnab Goswamis of the world have claimed. But international media has also said that at least 2 and up to 5 aircraft were shot down by the Pakistanis. If you look at the international messaging, the Pakistanis also gained. Most of the messaging, including American messaging, re-hyphenated India and Pakistan. They reintroduced the both sidesisms, which gives legitimacy to the Pakistani position that Kashmir has a dispute. This is a victory at the diplomatic level for Pakistan, and it's a decisive loss for India at the diplomatic level. And I think it is because both countries were able to claim their pound of flesh that both were receptive to off-ramps to the conflict. And also given the what appeared to be a rapidly escalating conflict, far more rapid an escalation than we saw at Pulwama.
Great, thank you so much for that. Did you say that you had to leave at 11:45, Dr.?
Yes, I do. I unfortunately have a doctor's appointment.
Oh dear. Okay.
The perils of getting old.
Yes,
Don't get old.
We're all going through that. But I would then, if the other two speakers don't mind, if I could just ask Dr. Fair another question about this, then, how. Again, sort of based on everything that you've just heard and also some of what you've just said, then who are the biggest winners and losers of this 4-day crisis?
I don't think there is a big winner or a big loser. As I said, both came out meeting certain objectives. Both lost certain objectives. I do think Pakistan was the bigger loser strategically because the Indians did demonstrate that they could strike deep in Pakistan's heartland, and that they could strike
But so did
very.
Pakistan, though, right?
No, the evidence does not suggest that. If you look at the recent report by the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Pakistani claims of targets against India were largely inefficacious, whereas the Indian targets were efficacious. And they also targeted really important sites. Like Nur Khan was a critical site. It's home to the Hercules aerial refueler, uh, and it's also just a short distance from the Strategic Plans Directorate. So I think in terms of strategic signaling, I think the Indians definitely prevailed, but there are many, how you define victory depends upon how you slice it, and both can walk away from this conflict declaring their own forms of victory.
What do you think the American mediation efforts, what triggered that? Because I mean, while that crisis was going on and escalating, there were, JD Vance was saying, well, it's really none of our business. Trump was saying, oh, they can figure it out by themselves. Was it the attack on the Nur Khan base that was close to the Nuclear Command Authority that actually triggered American involvement? Or do you think they were involved from the very beginning, but were sort of putting up this facade of indifference in the beginning?
So what we know from the New York Times is that there were at least two catalytic factors that changed the U.S. position from one of indifference to one of active involvement. And then I'll address your second question later. And those two factors were increasingly risky dogfights and the attack on Nur Khan. So this is according to the New York Times reporting. And quite frankly, that sounds sensible to me. With regard to was the U.S. involved all along? Well, we know that Marco Rubio, we know that Tulsi Gabbard, for what that was worth, were in fact engaging their counterparts on both sides. So it's not that the U.S. was absent. I think JD Vance, I don't think he's the sharpest knife in the drawer. I think he misspoke. I think that he suggested that the U.S. was not engaged in activity that it was thoroughly engaged in. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has really made a number of guffaws. It has said that the Indians have agreed to wide-ranging talks at a third neutral location. There's absolutely no evidence that is the case. In fact, that runs orthogonal to every Indian talking point for the last 25 years, if not longer. So, I mean, these are talking points that predate Clinton, quite frankly. So, there's a question, I don't think the U.S.-India relationship has been so sort of off its kilter since the Najjar killing and the targeting of Panun, who are, of course, the Khalistani activists that Wajahat discussed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Fair. And again, if you have to leave, please do so. Again, thank you so much for your
Great.
participation. And I wish you
Thank
could have
you.
stayed for longer, but we completely understand.
So, Christine, are you okay? You're not on Facebook these days.
So I haven't been on Facebook for over a year, and the reason for it is technical. I don't know. I can't get into my Facebook account, but I'm also really pleased because I've seen my colleagues be very horrible human beings over the atrocities in Gaza. And so my professional and my personal relationships has really been strained by my friends and colleagues' views supporting Israel. I am of course a very vocal supporter of Palestinian rights, justice for Palestinians, and quite frankly, freedom for Palestinians. So I think not being on Facebook has been really good for me. But I am coming to India. I'm back in India this summer doing, I don't think you guys know this, but I do Punjabi translating. That's sort of like my love is Punjabi translation. So I'll be back in Chandigarh this summer doing Punjabi translations. But if I get to Delhi, I'll certainly let you know.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for
Thank
that,
you.
Dr. Fair. Dr. Joshi, let me just sort of turn to the internal politics now, right? So, in the wake of Pahalgam and everything that has ensued, do you believe there is any space left in India to talk about legitimate Kashmiri grievances in Indian administered Kashmir? The draconian laws and conditions that they're subjected to, the suppression of dissent, the Public Safety Act, arbitrary detentions, etc. That is the first part of the question. What will happen to that? We've seen that there have been house demolitions in response to Pahalgam and others. So I'd love to hear your take on that and how Indian civil society is going to respond to some of those things. And then also, how will this escalation, the 4-day war, shape India's domestic politics, particularly the influence of Hindutva ideology and the targeting of minorities, especially Muslims in India?
Well, with regard to Kashmir, yes, this is an issue. What happened in Pahalgam, for the first time, we saw a public reaction in Kashmir. We saw candlelight vigils, we saw anger, we saw support for India. At the brutality of the attack upset a lot of people. And this is really the first time we are seeing this in Kashmir. And so many of us, meaning I have actually written about this, feel that this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to do precisely that, meaning to try to ease the burden of the Kashmiris on the security front, in particular, the reduction of arbitrary detentions, the reduction of arbitrary demolition of homes, all that should go. And the best, and this is the point where the Indian policy of winning hearts and minds should once again be resumed. And this has not been happening for some time. The government has taken a hard, tough stand on Kashmir ever since it came to power in 2014. From 2017 onwards, there has been a tough government policy. But this, the outcome of Pahalgam, I felt was an opportunity where you can shift things. And I think the Kashmiri leadership led by Umar Abdullah, who's recently been elected as the chief minister, also understands this. But the thing in Kashmir is that you have quite a mountain to climb, because you have to first restore the statehood in Kashmir. Statehood in Kashmir, Kashmir was reduced to a union territory of India in 2019. So you have to restore statehood there. Secondly, you have to study the security situation, because last year there were quite a few attacks in the Trans-Pir Panjal area, Poonch, Rajouri, Riyasi, and some of those areas. And then after Umar took over as chief minister, some of the attacks resumed north of the Banihal Pass. So the security remains an issue. So it is very difficult to convince the authorities that you ease off on security because of Pahalgam, because the actual tendency would be to become even more tougher.
Right.
On the security front.
But Umar Abdullah is not even in charge of security, right? It is the governor.
No, he's not. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
That would be, as I said, there was a high mountain to climb. So the first stage in that is actually the restoration of statehood, for this thing. And then we can move in the other fronts. But as I said, right now, the prevailing mood, especially after Pahalgam, because I think there was security lapse on the part of the authorities. The meadow was unguarded, you see. And so these are issues which they are now catching up with. So I think for a while, you're going to have pretty tight security in Kashmir. But as I said, I think the Pahalgam incident is the beginning of a process which the Indian state should utilize to try to restore normalcy in Kashmir. Now, as far as the second part of your question is concerned, the issue, of course, affects domestic politics, primarily because the people who were killed were largely Hindus, except for the one Kashmiri pony seller, and there's one Buddhist from Arunachal Pradesh, Nepal. They were Hindus. Number two, and they were asked to prove that that they were not Muslims, meaning this was also another. Meaning this is what's there in the public perception mix that is floating around, and so the killing of these people has stoked a great deal of anger across the country. Meaning earlier we have had massacres, we've had terrorist massacres. Kashmiris have been massacred, Sikhs have been massacred in Cheti Singhpura, Kashmiris have been massacred in Doda and other places, but they have had a local impact. But here we have a cross India impact because of this. And certainly for the BJP, which is an advocate of the Hindutva policy that is promoting Hinduness, this is something which they feel very strongly about, and which they certainly is something which adds to their desire, to promote, the security perceptions from the Hindu point of view.
So that's going to increase. I mean, you're expecting that to increase that sort of Hindu nationalist fervor and targeting of minorities. But I'm wondering what Indian civil society groups are doing to counter that. Those who've been speaking out against it in the past, do you think there's any room or space for them to launch a counter campaign to sort of protect the rights of minorities in this climate?
No, you have people. The Indian minorities, are not exactly very small in number. They are pretty substantial. They also have electoral clout when it matters. You also have leaders like, Mr. Owaisi, who talks his mind, Omar Abdullah, many other leaders in the minorities who take a tough stand and are quite assertive in defending their rights. You're seeing the recent issue of the Waqf bill going through the Indian Parliament and the resistance that has been mounted by elements of the Muslim community to this. So the Indian minorities are not a pushover. They're certainly not a pushover, and they're fairly numerous, and they also have electoral clout. They often, in association with opposition parties, are able to show that. And don't forget that in the last year's elections, Prime Minister Modi didn't do as well as he thought he would.
Right.
Meaning he actually lost his majority.
Yes.
And in part, it's the nature of Indian politics is how you're able to build a coalition. And the BJP has been very good at it. And they have certainly utilized the Hindutva ideology to promote that. But that doesn't mean that they have a free run. Meaning there are large parts of India where they don't have a free run. So I think, but to answer your question about civil society, I think the civil society has become a bit enervated now. We do not have the kind of strong civil society institutions that we had some time back. They have been affected by this. The issues are much more political. So instead of civil society, it's a political clash, meaning between the Hindutva ideology and the ideology of the opposition parties combined.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Joshi. I'm going to let Wajahat respond to any of the comments that you just heard, Wajahat, either by Dr. Joshi or Dr. Fair. But then I also have my question to you about the Pakistani political domestic situation, right? So how has this crisis strengthened the Pakistani military's grip on politics, especially amid growing anti-military sentiment among Imran Khan supporters and pro-democracy pro-democracy activists. As you're well aware, there's a very strong pro-democracy movement that's been taking place in the diaspora, also within Pakistan, since Imran Khan's ousting, and the military had become increasingly unpopular, or rather its intervention in politics and the human rights abuses that it had been perpetrating. So how will this impact military authoritarianism in the country, as well as the pro-democracy movement that has emerged to counter it? Because there was a lot of sort of national sentiment that was whipped up during the 4-day crisis with India.
Yeah, thank you. I will like to take that in just a minute. We can get to Imran Khan and the Pakistani political scene internally in just a minute. But firstly, to Christine's take, I've sort of put together a winner's scoreboard to embellish her points and also challenge a couple of them. I agree mostly with what she said, but I do take I will take a different point of view to a couple others. Firstly, I think in my scoreboard, in the build-up to the war, India won. As stated earlier, India did a better job in its global diplomatic blitz of naming and shaming Pakistan. Pakistan did try its best. It went up and even offered an independent investigation. But as Dr. Joshi said, these things don't matter, especially in a world with no boundaries, where a larger aggressive nation can, whether it's Russia, whether it's Israel, whether it's India, can go ahead and do what they need to do, where the guardrails of international diplomacy are off. The UN is rather useless, and the Americans are living in splendid isolation. India won the build-up to the war phase. But then let's get to the war itself. I think tactical superiority belonged to the Pakistanis in the first phase of the war, especially with their downing of those 5 Indian planes. But that's tactical superiority for a short, intense conflict. As the war proceeded, we saw that strategically, India's use of weaponry was broader and wider. Christine's reference to the New York Times and the Washington Post articles are interesting. India deployed land and sea assets in a defensive deployment, but its air assets in a very wide offensive deployment: drones, missiles, and of course its aircraft, which it lost. But it managed to breach parts of Pakistan which it has never breached. It managed to go deep inside Pakistan in a way it's never gone in its previous wars in Pakistan. So strategic weaponry wise, India takes it. Pakistan had a counteroffensive, but relatively speaking, Pakistan's air defenses were weak versus India's air offensive when it comes to the drone and the missile stage, not the fighter or interceptor stage. Strategic restraint-wise, Pakistan absorbed at least 3 rounds of Indian aggression. The first round on those 9 sites, which were hit on the 7th of May. The second round the next day, when cities were swarmed with the Israeli Hirop and Harpy drones. And then the third round, when the Indians went in and hit Nur Khan and those other military sites. That's when the Pakistanis launched. So keep in mind, everything till those first 3 rounds were mostly defensive or probing mechanisms. The Pakistanis launched their unpronounceable Operation Banyanun Marsus, but they did take 3 rounds. So I would say strategic restraint-wise, the Pakistanis kept their hats on, and that's where the diplomacy bit comes in. That's where the Indians started losing. The rehyphenation with Pakistan, the grouping with Pakistan, the clubbing with Pakistan, the parity with Pakistan, that not just this Indian administration, but for the last 2.5, even 3 decades that the Indians have so hardly fought for. They fought so hard, tooth and nail, to be disassociated with Pakistan, because Pakistan's a basket case. Pakistan is small, and Pakistan is weak, and Pakistan is a terrorist. So we want nothing to do with the Pakistanis. There is no term as Indo-Pak in Indian policy elite circles these days, and hasn't been for the last 2 decades. But guess what? Indo-Pak is back. India-Pakistan, Pakistan-India is a grouping which Indian diplomats are going to have to spend a lot of time working against. And that's where Pakistan's strategic restraint worked out. And that's where information warfare should come in as well. I must sadly, as a journalist, state that in a country which is the world's largest democracy, one expects better from journalists. And here are not just, this is not just my observation, but most independent observers, including Indians, were shocked at the way Indian media was drinking its own Kool-Aid versus the Pakistanis, which, by the way, Pakistani journalists are not as free as Indian journalists. And yet, Pakistan's anemic state-run or private media did remarkably better and was more balanced. Of course, some of them were drinking their own Kool-Aid too. But I'm talking about the largest fair, where I would say information warfare was a draw, where it really came down to for the first time. This was the first war which was really televised. This was sort of our 1991 Iraq crisis in South Asia. I thought it was really interesting that the information warfare bit, which doesn't get enough academic attention.
And on social media as well, right? So we had those channels, but then also social media played a very critical role.
Of course, and by televised, I mean we saw it, the TikToks and the Twitters, and of course all the other platforms, the YouTubes, and I think that's a whole other conversation. But when it comes to preventive diplomacy, the point I'm trying to make is the Pakistanis did a better job. They got the Americans involved at just the right moment, and the Americans stole the Indians' thunder. The whole Indian narrative is very simple. Oh, the Pakistanis were begging for a ceasefire. Their DGMO called at 3:35 p.m. For a ceasefire at 5 p.m. Nobody cares. Nobody cares because not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times, now for a 5th time, just a few hours ago, the American president has taken credit. This is his ceasefire.
You can't stop talking about it. Yeah.
You cannot take the credit away from Donald Trump if he said something 5 times. So Mr. Modi and his entire South Bloc apparatus have not been able to repudiate a word of Mr. Trump's or Mr. Rubio's or J.D. Vance's or any other American officials' tweets or Truth Social updates. This is an American brokered ceasefire. End of story. The Indians can go ahead and harp around what it is. But if I were to say something, this is really critical. The tactical winner on the battlefield was the smaller Pakistan, but the strategic winner clearly is India. India has scared, for lack of a better word, strategic planners in Pakistan. It showed them its intention. It's gone ahead and said this is not really a ceasefire. This is going to keep on happening. The new normal is rather scary. And I would say that in all of this, the way we are going to now analyze and see the weapons race in South Asia, the way all of this works out in terms of the water wars, which have also started. There's a whole side of this which we're not even acknowledging, which is the Indus Water Treaty, which creates an issue of water security for millions of Pakistanis. I think,
and we'll come to that, Wajahat. We will come to that.
One last point in all of this: the fact that Christine Fair can get away with saying, and I wish she was around, the fact that Christine Fair can get away with saying, "Oh, I just hope that the Indians were doing more decapitation hits in Pakistan." Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There is no doubt. Let's just be academically and intellectually honest. There is no doubt that Pakistan has harbored militants and masterminds of all sorts for decades now on both sides of the border. There is no doubt. I'm not going to defend Pakistan in that sense, but there is also no doubt that India cannot get away with what it's been trying to get away with. India is not Israel and Pakistan is not Lebanon. India cannot just send in planes, decapitate someone, and walk away with it from the crime scene. It's not going to happen. And the very fact that India is being encouraged right now to do more of this by the Christine Fairs and the BJPs of the world is scary, because in the larger scheme, the real strategic winner, by the way, in all of this, frankly, in my opinion, which we haven't talked about, which should be on your interview as well, is China and the weapons race.
And we'll talk about China. We will talk about China, but I really would like you to quickly, very briefly now, because you answered other things, but not the question that I had asked you about domestic politics in Pakistan and how this will impact military authoritarianism in that will we see a greater crackdown by the military because of its newfound sort of support amongst the populace? Also, the government, both the civilian and military leadership, tried to sort of unify the country behind what this operation was and everything. Do you think that's going to last? Or are people too not ready to accept military authoritarianism the way it's been happening and are quick to sort of see through this facade?
Okay, so interesting, right? So the Pakistan's political polarization was partially the reason for India's threat assessments. The army was perceived as weak. The general Asim Munir was perceived as weak, but weak is not weak. Unpopular he may be, weak he wasn't. And the very fact that the army has managed to do what it hasn't been able to do in years is to rally people around the flag of nationalism. Mr. Modi has empowered the Pakistani military in a way where even the Pakistani military couldn't have empowered itself with this flag of war. Now, that creates an earthquake on the other side, which is the opposition, which is the PTI, which is the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and Imran Khan. What about I guess your question is, what about the democratic future of Pakistan? Well, the good news is that there are rumblings of, for the sake of national unity, there are rumblings, there are stories in the military-run press that talks with Imran Khan might proceed. But for now, Imran Khan and his PTI are on the back burner, front and center, popular and powerful. Popular is a relative term. Relatively popular versus what, 2 weeks ago, is General Asim Munir, who, by the way, is now going to be around potentially for the next 7 years, right? And with that comes another critical element that as his stock goes up in Pakistan, the more Modi does to hammer down this new normal, and there are no more red lines, and operation this and operation that. The Indian press is already harping on about the next operation. The more the Indians beat their war drums, the more it's going to entrench Pakistan's military, which has crazy, as this is a whole other conversation, the ramifications for Pakistan's democracy, for Pakistan's polity, are going to be crazy. But very critically, there is a short window here where the military can work on its strengths. It can go ahead and implement critical reforms the Pakistani economy needs. It can go ahead and implement critical reforms in trade, in governance. It can perhaps even go ahead and fight those Western threats with impunity that it was perhaps not using in the past against the Baloch and the Pashtuns in the TTP. Premised on that, the bottom line is, to tell you very simply, 3 takeaways. 1, this is not good in the short run for Imran Khan and his PTI because they've been backbenched. 2, the military is, for now, further empowered because it's more popular. And 3, the military will have a very short window. This feel-good window will not last long. But the military will have a very short window to make its reforms and push its agenda. However, that window will be expanded if the Indians keep on beating their war drums, and they have every intention of doing that, it seems.
Interesting analysis. I will push back on that just a little bit. I do agree with most of what you just said, but I feel that Pakistan is currently going through this revolutionary moment. It's not there yet in terms of the numbers on the streets that you see against military authoritarianism, but we are seeing the people, the pro-democracy activists, galvanized in a way that we've never seen before. We've seen the Pakistani American diaspora push back, and I feel this window is almost negligible because even as the crisis was happening, there were people on social media, digital terrorists, as the Pakistani state likes to call them, who were calling out their own military leadership in the midst of all of this and are very clear about the fact that they are no longer going to buy the military's narrative about how we all need to be unified, because there is this sense in Pakistan right now that, yes, India is absolutely an external threat, but we have an internal threat of military authoritarianism that affects us more urgently and more immediately. I know we have a very deep disagreement around that, but we can talk about
Well,
that
there's no
another time.
disagreement around that.
No, but
It's
I
just
think that there is. I think we have a.
no, let me circle back on
No,
that.
Vajat, because I think we do need to move on
No,
only
I'm just gonna
because we need to bring in questions and we need to get to Dr. Joshi, who's been waiting
You can't
patiently.
put words in my mouth that we have a disagreement when we don't. So I deserve the right to repost. We don't have a disagreement about the fact that there is a moment in Pakistan right now where people are seeking space against the military. But the military has just gotten a lot of space back. And unfortunately, I don't think that those people who you just mentioned are going to be winning it anytime soon, especially because of the larger existential threat that is seen with Indian actions.
And I think that those very same
and
people, yes, I feel like they again feel that their existential threat really emanates from within than it does from Indian aggression that ended 4 days ago.
I think
This is something that they've been experiencing for a very long time. So with that difference of opinion, we are now going to move on. I do have another round of questions for both our speakers, but I really feel that we need to bring in Dr. Joshi and some of the questions from the audience. Dr. Joshi, we do have a question for you, and that is which says, if Narendra Modi had not taken away Kashmir's autonomous status, 370, would the recent terrorist attack have occurred?
Well, I think it would still have occurred, because don't forget that was 2019. We are here in 2025. So if there was a direct connection between that event and this attack, I think the attack would have taken place. I don't think it is connected, because if you look at the 2019 events, when autonomy was taken away, when the state of Kashmir was demoted to a union territory, thereafter, very little happened. Meaning very little happened. Even from Pakistan, we did not get that much of a pushback, as people have spoken of. We were having back channel conversations with Pakistan. 2019, 2020, 2021. There were in 2021, if you know, a ceasefire was declared on the line of control, which was pretty effective till very recently. So what I'm trying to say is there's a very different sequence there. And this particular attack has come out of somewhere else. And I suspect, as Christine pointed out, that it had to do with the Pakistani charge that India was involved in the Jafar Express.
Okay, and I guess in the next few days and weeks, we will see more sort of information coming out of both countries in terms of what happened with Jafar and also at Pahalgam. I also wanted to sort of talk to you about the ceasefire, right, that was announced by Trump. It appears as if the Indian government was not particularly happy and did not and has not credited the Trump administration for brokering that ceasefire. On the other hand, Trump cannot seem to stop talking about it, as Wajahat just mentioned. So knowing India's aversion to internationalizing the issue of Kashmir, do you believe India would allow any kind of US involvement in Kashmir, India-Pakistan relations? And also, what in terms of the recent episode, what impact will it have on India-US relations, if any? Because I feel like every time Trump talks about this, it's an irritant to the Indian government, right? So how do you think this is going to have any sort of long-term impact on that relationship?
I think knowing Donald Trump, India will simply lump it. I don't see, because Trump has this style of repeating again and again the similar. Now that is stuck in his mind, that we have brokered this ceasefire. Now the reality is that the US did broker it, but brokering is different from effecting. The ceasefire was effected by direct India-Pakistan contact. Now, whether the Pakistani DGMO called or whether the Indian DGMO called, I'm not going to go into that. But the fact of the matter is that the US did take the call. Otherwise, if they had not done so, why would Trump have been the first person to announce it?
Right.
He was the very first person to announce it. So I don't agree with Indian officials who say that the US did not broker it. I personally think that the US did broker it, and Indians and Pakistanis affected it, meaning the DGMOs.
Right.
The second thing is that in terms of equivalence, hyphenation. Now, hyphenation has occurred, meaning no country can control that. But the third part, that whether India will talk on Kashmir, India will not. India will not talk on anything except bilaterally, because under the Simla agreement, we had agreed. We've done the UN bit. We have gone to UN time and again. We went to UN in 47 complaining of Pakistani aggression, and the UN turned around and made it into a India-Pakistan issue. So as far as India is concerned, we've been burnt once by the UN. That's the reason why we don't go to the UN on these issues. So we have learned the hard way that the UN is not going to help. The US is not going to help. The US is all right because of the US is concerned about nuclear issues. And they have a right to do so because India and Pakistan are nuclear weapons powers. And if India and Pakistan blow each other up, it is going to affect the rest of the world, meaning they are welcome to blow each other up, but it will affect the rest of the world. So countries like the US are concerned about it, and they have a right to be concerned about it. And so they do intervene, and they have the ability to broker, to push. Meaning, if you look at Rubio's statement, he started off the first 2 days, he said, you two guys de-escalate. On the third day, he started saying, America can play a role in helping you de-escalate. And then I think behind the scenes, America did play that role.
Right. But you don't think this is going to have an adverse impact, like the way the Trump administration is talking about this issue, you don't think this is going to have an adverse impact on India-US relations?
No, I don't think so. And one reason as I said, the Indians will lump it. The second is that the Indians are right now negotiating a bilateral trade agreement with the United States.
Right.
So we are not just about to torpedo that, because that is something which Mr. Trump will scrutinize personally, given his penchant for this for tariff. So I think Indians will not take too much umbrage. They will simply lump it.
Right. Okay. Ignore him. Wajahat, also let me ask you about the durability of this ceasefire, right? Again, this is something that India has downplayed, but Pakistan has really welcomed. And we've seen Shehbaz Sharif, I think he's, thanked almost every country in the world now for being involved in sort of de-escalating the situation. Like every 15 minutes, there's a new country he's thanking. So my question is, how durable is this? Because, even Modi talked about it as being a pause right now.
Yeah.
And does Pakistan sort of view US mediation in this crisis to sort of, intervene and address root causes like Kashmir and the Indus Water Treaty?
I think Pakistan, as the smaller power, is really going to play up the ceasefire, both as a diplomatic victory and as the new status quo. India, as the stronger power, will go ahead and say, yeah, but we're going to come for you if you want to, whenever, at a time of our own choosing. That's going to play down for their local audiences as well, as we've already started seeing. But Dr. Joshi said something very interesting here about the talks. And so did Christine. And I feel like that's really where the heart of the matter is. Talks have, in a way, already begun. Allow me to expand. Firstly, there was the immediate knee-jerk reaction, especially from Indian media, from the Arnab Goswamis of the world and other analysts of the world, was, Rubio's wrong. There aren't going to be no talks, no neutral venue, no talks. Nahi, ye nahi ho sakta, right? Now, that is the stated Indian position, no talks, and that has been for several years. But two things have occurred. Firstly, Pakistan has written back about the Indus waters. Now, the Indus water letter was written by India, but Pakistan's writing back, and that is now being reported. That's begun. That's not really talking. That's correspondence. But correspondence is the beginning of talking. That's interesting. And it's being reported widely on Indian media. That's one. Two, Mr. Modi, in his address, in his OV1 address, which I don't think we have time to analyze that, but he said something very interesting. He said, and I'm quoting, Agar Pakistan ke saath baat hogi, meaning if there is a conversation with Pakistan, it's going to be on two things, terror and POK, which is the Indian term for Azad Kashmir or Pakistani administered Kashmir. The Indians like to call it Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Now, you can call it Pakistan occupied Kashmir, or you can call it a Bear Burger, or you can call it Shake Shack. I don't really care what you want to call it. The good news is that within 48 hours of Marco Rubio's assessment, which he hasn't repudiated, that they are going to be talking, the Indian Prime Minister, India's most powerful man, is saying, if there is going to be any talking, he's not saying there's no talking. He is conditioning the talks. And that is a great start. What happens? Yesterday, the Pakistanis take that as a signal, and the Pakistanis are now inviting the Indians to have a comprehensive dialogue. That's a very interesting term. Do you remember the last time comprehensive dialogue was used, Dr. Joshi? I bet you remember. It was during the Musharraf era, which is when both sides were actually talking. They've taken out an old word.
Composite dialogue.
Composite dialogue.
Right. They've taken out an old word from an old dictionary, an old playbook, and they're calling it, well, not the same, similar, comprehensive dialogue on Kashmir. Now, this is really interesting. Neither side is repudiating Rubio. The Indians are being, of course, they have to be tough about it, and they are being tough about it. And there's a lot of ifs and buts and T and C's and terms and conditions. But frankly, neither side is saying no talks ever. The Indians have to be more brazen about softly rejecting it, because they haven't walked away as the winners, clear winners, which they wanted to be because of the ceasefire. And I think that gives me hope. As someone who tries to watch the diplomatic space, this gives me hope. However, in all of this, I don't think it's fair to assess that the drum beaters from both sides will have you believe this. The Pakistanis won is what the Pakistani military will have you believe. The Indians won is what the Indian military and its purveyors will have you believe. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Pakistan's a tactical winner. India is the larger strategic norm setter. There is a new norm here, which the Indians can dictate. And for me, most interesting to watch in all of this is now how diplomacy prevails. And from what I understand, signals from both sides have started. Will the Americans be able to grandfather this through? I'm not quite sure. I agree with Dr. Joshi that Mr. Trump, once he gets on a certain track, he keeps on repeating it. He's really sticking with this 1,000-year mantra, which is completely inaccurate. Like, he actually believes his own. He believes his own.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But the very fact is that he's sort of now, in the last 6 days, he's mentioned this 5 times. He's sort of obsessed about his own little victory. And that could create a place in American diplomacy where he's like, hey, Marco, what about those Pakistanis and Indians? Are we doing something about it? And Marco will be like, yes, sir. He's like, go get over there, talk to them. He's capable of doing that. And if he's capable of doing that, well, I must say, the Pakistanis will love it. And the Indians aren't going to be in a position to depose Mr. Trump's Trump's
and he keeps referring to the trade deals, right? So that might be that carrot that he's going to talk.
And there is parity. And just a few minutes ago, Mr. Trump chimed in about Apple, about Apple opening its plant in India. And he said, hold on to that for a minute. So he is using the trade bargain, the carrot and stick, to make sure he gets the best deal out of India. Pakistan doesn't have much to offer. Pakistan's given him a take what you will tariff deal right now. So premised on that, I think this is going to be very interesting because Mr. Trump now has a personal stake in all of this. And let's not forget, there is the right-wing media here, the Breitbarts of the world are already saying, give the man a Nobel Peace Prize. Right?
Yeah, of course.
So if he gets obsessed about that, all bets are off.
So given everything that you've just said in terms of American involvement and some signs from both India and Pakistan around this, you believe that this ceasefire is likely going to be durable and it will last. And it's not, there were reports coming out that this is just a pause. So you think this is going to have more of a positive outcome. That's great. I'm just going to take a couple more questions together. But I would really like both of you, and I'll start with Dr. Joshi first, to really sort of touch on the China question as well, because that is massively critical to the way this entire thing played out over the 4-day crisis. So I really hope that you will address that. But I do want to get to the audience real quick. Another question was, I believe, to you, Dr. Joshi, what was the Indian Army doing when this attack happened? There are more than 600,000 military personnel in the area. How could this have happened? As you know, there are talk within Pakistan, of course, when this happened, that this was a false flag operation. So if you could sort of address that notion. And then the third question is about while the current crisis may be de-escalating on the surface, what are the long-term implications of regional diplomacy and crisis management? So, Dr. Joshi, you first, please.
Well, false flag operation, that's, I can't answer there because I simply do not have any information. As I said, I know what the Indian intelligence has gathered and why the police was not there. This issue has been raised. And I have said that it is a failure on the part of the police. The other thing,
and the perpetrators, sorry, I'm so sorry to interject, but the 4 perpetrators of Pahalgam are also at large. They have not been apprehended.
No, they have not been apprehended. They have not been apprehended. And the thing is that in Kashmir, everyone talks of 600,000 troops and all that. But, in the last, I have written a book on Kashmir, meaning I have a book, a 1999 book, which looked at the first 10 years of the Kashmiri insurgency. So, which was published by Penguin in India. The point is that militancy or terrorism in the last 10 years has come down, declined dramatically. Tourism was shooting up. So, the thing in Kashmir is it's not as though there were kind of security personnel all over the place. They weren't. There were tourists all over the place. That was the problem. See? So therefore, there was a security failure, but there should have been some policemen around, and there were none. What was the second part of the question you asked?
It was while the current crisis may be de-escalating on the surface, what are the long-term implications of regional?
Long-term implications. See, the thing is, I still believe India and Pakistan will be where they are 1,000 years from now, meaning notwithstanding Trump. You see, we are destined to be where we are. Many of us in Indians think that Pakistanis want to become West Asians, but Pakistanis are Pakistanis and Indians are Indians. We are where we are. And so at some point we'll have to work out ways of a cooperative relationship. And we have, meaning it's not that it's impossible. I have noted, since we don't have time, there have been at least 4 instances in India-Pakistan history when we have come close to resolving the vexed issue of Kashmir. And the latest was when Musharraf was there in 2007. So it's not an impossible task. It can be done. But one thing I'm certain about, that the Pakistan army will have to go back to the barracks. The Pakistan Army's role in Pakistan and the manner in which it has nurtured, I would say, jihadi fighters to launch a proxy war on India is simply not doable. I mean, there's no way in which you can have any kind of normal relations in such circumstances. So there will have to be some kind of a dismantling of the terror apparatus that is there. The Murid case, the Bhawalpur establishment will have to, something will have to be done with them. Meaning, I know that in the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, some people were put in jail. But as I said, they were put in jail for money laundering, not for terrorism. We want a whole lot of those guys for Mumbai, where we have evidence, where we can give that. We have given that evidence to Pakistan. Why aren't we getting hold of, Hafiz Muhammad Saeed or Zakiur Rahman Lakwi, Sajid Mir? These characters should be turned over to us. So what I'm trying to say is that the future, I think, is a cooperative relationship. I would like to think that there is no other future possible but a cooperative one.
I hope so.
We must work towards.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Joshi, for that. Wajahat, I'll give you the last word. If you can, because we're reaching the end of our time now, if you can respond to what Dr. Joshi said and also just maybe quickly address the China question, if you could.
Yeah. Firstly, to Dr. Joshi's point of view, thank you for being so articulate and so honest. I really appreciate it. Firstly, I'm going to quick story about to answer your as a take to your bit about Pakistan's or the Pakistani military's infatuation with proxy warriors and proxy war. It was the early 2000s, and the ceasefire with India was about to be in place, and I was reporting from the line of control and having a cigarette at night with a young captain of an infantry unit on the line of control. We could see Indian positions on the other side, and we could even see the smoke rising from the Indian posts. So everybody was taking a smoke break that night. The ceasefire had just been implemented, so everybody was chilling. And so during this cigarette break, I asked this young officer, I said, listen, man, why do you guys do this? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, why do you guys do this? You've got a uniform, you've got a gun position, you've got an OP, they've got a uniform, they've got a gun position, they've got an OP. Why don't you guys do this, army to army? Why do you have to do what we all know you've been doing, which is, putting militants in the pipeline and smuggling them across as proxy warriors, the border? And this young officer said, Wajahat bhai, I can only answer that question if you answer a question of mine. I'm like, okay, what's the question? He's like, who was Pakistan's first proxy warrior? And I was like, excuse me? He's like, who was Pakistan's first proxy warrior? And I was dumbfounded. I had no idea. I didn't know that there was a #1 proxy warrior in Pakistan's vaunted paramilitary history. I was like, I have no idea. He's like, Wajahat bhai, if you don't know the answer to that question, we can't really, probe this subject. Because if I was like, okay, well, tell me. He's like, well, the first proxy warrior of Pakistan was Qaeda-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And I was like, please tell me more. He's like, well, it was the fall of 1947-48 when we started fighting. And that's where the Qaid himself went on to make a decision that Pashtun tribesmen would cross over and fight the Indian airlift into Kashmir because his own generals, the Goras, Auchinleck, etc., were not taking orders. So because India is bigger, because India is larger, it's badder, it's always got the initiative, partition was unfair to us, etc., etc., proxy war is effectively a part of our larger strategy because that's how it is. Now, this goes on to really underscore the deeply entrenched nationalistic leanings of, because Muhammad Ali Jinnah is a very different figure. He's not a mullah. He's not a Hafiz Saeed. He's the founder of the country. He's the gold standard of what's supposed to be great in that country, right? Now, that is a very, very deeply entrenched bit, but it gets further entrenched. It gets further entrenched when on the other side of the border, Hindutva, anti-Muslim bashing, entrenches the Pakistani military, as we have discussed. The Pakistani military, yes, must go back to the garrison. It must go back to the barracks. But wars, as we know, across the board, wars right now only allow militaries to gain more ground and civil society or peacenik bits to cede ground to the militaries. Currently, even liberal Indian media is harping on with op-eds about how this is a good time to get India's multi-role aircrafts procured, how this is a good time to further develop weapons, how this is a good time to counter Chinese PL-15s and J-10s. So even the civil society in India right now is saying, military, please develop more. We have this threat of Pakistan and China. We can't take it anymore. So premised on that, the Pakistani military at this moment is further empowered. Is that a good thing for Pakistan in the long run? Question mark / no. No military should ever, ever exceed its constitutional boundaries. But the very fact that a larger, greater, and I must say, really aggressive enemy on the other side is beating those war drums now with the sort of non-secular and extremist behavior we don't expect from it. Pakistan, as Salman Rushdie has said, India is going through a Pakistan phase. India is experimenting with those same detrimental religious dogmatic principles that Pakistan has experimented with and failed. Through the 70s and 80s, Pakistan's experiments with Islamism have backfired, and the Indians seem to be doing just that under this right-wing government. And that is something which really scares me in the long run for both countries. The Pakistanis are already suffering through the long-term impacts of mixing church and state. The Indians seem to be catching on as well. And that's problematic in a nuclear threat.
Wajahat, I have just one point. I want you to know that under the Modi government, funding for India's defense has been declining steadily as a proportion of GDP. Meaning
That's an important point.
Modi is actually underfunding India's MOD. Meaning every year in the last 5 years, as a proportion of GDP, money is coming down.
That's interesting. That's an interesting thing to know. But India does remain still the largest importer of arms in the world, doesn't it, sir?
Yeah. Meaning that I have no doubt. But all I'm trying to say is that far from being building up a war machine, Modi is actually underfunding it.
And Dr. Joshi, do you think that might change after this episode? Do you think there might be a change in that after this episode, Dr. Joshi?
No, I think if I know Modi, Modi genuinely believes that that there will be no major war involving India, whether it is with Pakistan, whether it is with China. He believes that there will be no major war involving the two, but he wants that money. Why? He's a politician. He wants the money for welfare programs for the public. He wants the money for investment in the growth of India, development expenditure. So he wants to focus in those areas which pay him off as a politician. We give him a payoff as a politician.
Just a quick point. I found it, and we don't have to debate this, but I found it very interesting that in the wake of Pulwama, Mr. Modi was effectively saying, agar Rafael hote, to kya hota? Like Amitabh says to Rekha, agar tum hoti to aisa hota, tum hoti to vaisa hota. But in the wake of this crisis, he said something very interesting. And that is really, really indicative of where things are going. Last time he was looking for foreign fighters, and he got them. This time he's saying made in India is the answer. So
yeah, but made in India is a very inferior fighter.
Yeah,
made in India, the made in India fighter that we have has been around, been doing it for the last 40 years. Its quality is
but that goes on to show you, right? That last time he made a case for French fighters, he got them. This time he's making a case for Indian fighters.
See, what I'm trying to say is we will still get those French fighters, probably. But all I'm saying is when you look at the statistics, you can look at the military balance, the Institute of Strategic Studies military balance, and look at the multi-year funding. You'll find the funding is declining slightly.
Okay, well, gentlemen, we really do have to wrap it up here. There were so many other issues that, of course, we wanted to get to, but we couldn't because of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Joshi, Wajahat, Dr. Fair, who's left, for a really illuminating and thought-provoking discussion. And thank you to everybody who joined us, either through the live stream or in the Zoom room. Today's webinar, I believe, really underscored the complexity of the India-Pakistan crisis, the mistrust between the two countries, compounded by domestic politics and regional flashpoints, really at this moment demands nuanced diplomacy. It demands dialogue and also accountability from all sides. And I do think that we got to a bit of that. As we close I really encourage everyone to continue this conversation, whether through advocacy or scholarship or community engagement. We will share the recording of this webinar as well. And again, thank you both so much for your time and for your very nuanced analysis. And thank you to everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm just honored to be on the same stage with Dr. Joshi. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Malika.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, that was good, Malika Samdani. If you want to further debate what you were saying, I'm always happy to talk about the Imran Khan bit. But I hope you enjoyed what we did. I hope you enjoyed the chat. This is a long and difficult and very, very long process. It's going to keep going and going. But in all of this, what the best part is that finally, at least on this level, people are talking. Just earlier today, I was noticing that people are talking on Khurram Hussain was talking to a bunch of Indian journalists as well. He's a Dawn columnist and a former colleague of mine. So people are beginning to talk. And that's a good thing. And that was something which was not happening during the course of the war. My friends in Indian media weren't talking to me, even though I was trying to reach out to them. That stopped. And that's a good sign. That is a great sign of where things are going. The very fact that Indians and Pakistanis and others are all now finally communicating, doing battle damage assessments, figuring out what's next, figuring out ab kya hoga, is a good sign. Will the talks continue at a higher level? I hope so. As I said, the Indians are in the UN. Today, they're in New York. They're presenting a case. The Pakistanis will probably present a counter case. Diplomacy is the way to go. If there are indications that Pakistan is involved, Pakistan must address those concerns. I just hope that the war drums, which are beaten, have been beating for a while now, are quieting down. And to Dr. Joshi's point, if the Indian military expenditure has declined consistently, well, in Pakistan, it's barely kept up with the real GDP inflation growth in that country as well. Just recently, has there been an approval for up to a 16% increase. That doesn't mean that the Pakistanis should get away with further increases. The country can barely afford its defense expenditure. India's defense expenditure, however, in real terms, dwarfs Pakistan's. India's defense expenditure is around $80 to $90 billion versus Pakistan's less than $10 billion. So the comparison to say that Indian expenditure is declining is maybe accurate, but it dwarfs Pakistan's. And that's something which must be said for the record. Thank you. I hope you learned a thing or two from this. And I really thank Malika Samdani and her organization for doing this. And I will, inshallah, talk to you very soon. Pakistan,